we're going to really home in our comments on that particular program area. But rest assured that we could have a similar discussion about our 4-H and youth development programs. We could talk about our family programs. We could talk about rural development, community development as well. But we thought our time this morning might be best focused on food and agriculture. So we'll do that. But I hope that maybe some future opportunities arise where we could have a similar dialogue with other groups about other cooperative extension programs. So we'll move to slide 3. Let's see, I guess I can do that. Good. Okay. So slide 3, and let's start with just sort of to get us warmed up here. Think a little bit about what some of our strengths in cooperative extension are, and also some of the challenges that we face looking ahead. And as Michael indicated, you know, we've been celebrating or recognizing 100 years, but what's really important is the next 100 years at this point as well. So thinking about strengths, I know many states have done listening sessions, had feedback sessions, group discussions with advisory councils about, you know, what is it that you see as some of the strengths or some of the positives with regard to extension programs. And certainly one of the things that comes out regularly is trust, that there's a degree of trust among the information provided. And I think the reason for that is that we do our very best to remain research-based. That means we're obtaining a lot of our information. In fact, the majority of our information is based on the results of the work that the colleagues do across the country. And without that partnership, we really wouldn't have the trust. So those are two of our greatest strengths, I believe. Also, it always comes up that being local, being personal, having that interaction at the community level is one of our strengths. We're seen as a door to the university, which means, you know, if you have a request or you need knowledge, oftentimes, especially in our rural communities, we're the first point of contact for the university system. And I think our cooperative funding, and cooperative not in the sense of the co-op, who is kindly hosting our meeting here today, but cooperative among federal government, state government, county government in particular. And that remains a strength for us because it gives not only diversification of our funding sources, but it gives us connections with stakeholders at the local, state, and national level. In terms of challenges, you know, we certainly feel like we have our share of challenges, and as with any challenge, that can be either a problem or an opportunity, and in many cases, perhaps both. One of the challenges we certainly face is being available 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, providing information when individuals expect to have that information. And in this day and time, that is when people expect it, and that is at the point they need it. And that may be a Sunday evening, it may be 4 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Regardless, I think we're expected to provide that information. I think we need to be geared up in order to have that ability to convey that information as well. Increasing urbanization is recognized as, again, a challenge. That doesn't necessarily, again, mean it's a problem, but how do we convey and make our work relevant in an urban area that has 5 or 6 or 7 million residents with a staff of 3 or 4 or 5 individuals? How do we really effectively serve those audiences? Technology changes, and the pace with which technology is changing is a real challenge. And we all face that, whether we're agricultural producers or in the higher education business or in other state and government agencies. Competitive funding I've listed here as a challenge. And my reason, or our reason for listing it is not that it's a bad thing, but that it creates a different mindset for us to be more project-based, more outcome-based, and we need to be serious about that and focus on that and determine how we can do a better job in being competitive for competitive funding. Finally, globalization and internationalization. Our markets are global. Our constituents are oftentimes international in their background. How do we deal with language challenges? How do we deal with communication among growers to international markets and so forth? So let me pause right there and give an opportunity, and I'll start with the folks here in this room. What have we missed here in terms of strengths or challenges facing cooperative extension? As a reminder, this is where you talk to us.
This funding that we've been talking about, the cooperative funding, the fact that we've got local appropriated dollars, and the fact that we've got competitive funding, at least in my state, almost half of our budget is self-generated revenues. And we also have local communities that provide some appropriated funding for us. So those things have all shifted and will probably continue to shift. But we still have a sizable amount of what we call capacity funds, Smith-Lever funds, and competitive dollars in our portfolio. And those capacity funds are very important in extension to deal with flexible things, to deal with things like droughts and floods and emerging pests and so forth. So it's a mix of both of those. How about questions or comments so far? Yes.
Oh, yeah, Mike, Tim. Tim, I think I heard you say this is relative to competitive funding and transition to outcome-based kinds of activities. And the question there is, how is that different than what you currently do with extension programming as it is? Don't you have outcomes based on those things as well?
Exactly. I think that's the point, that we need to, all of our work to be outcomes-based. And there can be a mindset, well, there was general formula funds provided in the past, and that was just to provide dollars for good people to do good work. Well, that's not enough in this day and time. We need to be accountable. We need to have specific measurable objectives, and we need to have specific measurable outcomes and impacts associated with those, whether it be capacity or competitive.
And it goes to making sure that the competitive dollars that we've got are consistent with our mission. The other thing I think that we would say, again, in relation to the experiment station, is that in our state, at least, our county extension councils have been an excellent kind of completing the loop back to experiment station, as some of the branch station advisory committees have, asking the customer what it is they need in terms of the next round. That's been a very important thing about the land grant system. Extensions play a part of that, and it relates back to research as well.
One online comment, a challenge is that the clientele base is more educated and have access to knowledge and connections with others outside of extension who also are knowledgeable.
Excellent. So the question, in case you didn't hear Darren, was, or the comment was, another challenge is the degree of education, competence, and knowledge that many of our stakeholders have, that we're dealing with individuals who may have a bachelor's degree, master's degree, maybe even a doctoral degree. And how do we provide information of value to them when they're already starting at a very high level? Considerable challenge. Yes.
And it's a challenge that goes all the way from staffing our local offices to use of technology, which is what we're going to talk about here in a minute.
Well, how are you responding to that challenge?
On technology?
No, in terms of reaching out to them.
Depth, really, is what that refers to. My thinking is, how do you develop and deliver or provide education that has the depth that meets the needs of an agricultural producer operating $500,000 worth of equipment with GPS technology and so forth, and do that with someone who's got a very general background? And to me, that points towards specialization, not necessarily indicating that we've got doctoral level people in every position or every office, but that we have individuals that can choose an area of highest need, most priority in their particular area, and that we provide them the training and the knowledge to really be able to provide valuable information to those individuals. So,
in some cases, that for us, it requires a master's degree level in the field. It certainly requires additional ongoing professional development for those people. And I think it's to the good things that we've got going on the campus with split appointments. Research and extension faculty members on the campus.
Just an observation, given modern technology, and I'm seeing this evolve in the Natural Resources Conservation Service, you may not be able to train that first point of contact to that level, but you can give that person a portal to other expertise that they can reach out to in almost real time with modern technology. So is that something you're looking at?
perfect segue to our next slide.
Next slide.
Before we go to the next slide,
Sorry.
looking at this slide, certainly I look at the strengths and agree with those strengths. I mean, the 100-year history of the cooperative extension, born out of the Smith-Lever Act, which was, as I understand, was intended to strengthen rural America, to strengthen the ability for farmers to be better at science and to be able to produce food more efficiently and more abundantly. And I look over at the challenges, and I have to ask, why on the number 2, increasing urbanization, as you said, why would that even be a challenge if cooperative extension is to exist to strengthen rural America? Why are we dedicating resources to urban populations?
I think that's a good question, and one we need to consider ourselves as we move forward. The real pragmatic answer to me is, well, where are our constituents located? And if our constituents are largely urban and we're only serving a rural audience, will we exist? I mean, that's just being pretty pragmatic, I guess.
Yeah, I think, I think that if we think about where the products of agriculture go, and we just think of food, for example, we're going to talk about some of this. Just think of food. That big interaction is between where production and consumption happen, and most of that consumption happens in urban areas. And it gives us the opportunity to talk about the connection of that through our extension programs, and also the other benefits of agriculture to the urbanite, which is soil, water, those kinds of resources that really are represented in the rural landscape. So I think providing the connection there is better than cutting off that connection. We just have to, we have a kind of a tough balance.
It's a balance, yeah.
You need more resources if you want to try to do that. So when you're faced with limited resources, you need to prioritize.
And/or look at other strategies like technology and some other things. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you, Richard.
There's one more comment.
All right.
Okay.
Online, a challenge is county funding, which results in staff reduction at local expense.
Well, yeah, that's been an issue.
Could you repeat that, because they probably didn't hear that.
One of the challenges is local funding, county funding in most cases, and the loss of some of those funds, and the subsequent loss of faculty and staff at the local level. Actually, there are places where the county funding, local funding is increased. And to me, that's a testament to local funding. But there are challenges there because there's competing needs, and there's the constant sort of pushing down of the requirements without funding at the state level. So that will continue to be a problem. We have also that means probably have fewer people that are more highly qualified. I think that's how we dealt with it.
This is Mary Pat Ramonde from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics for those on the phone. But to your point, and I think it was very well taken on the rural side, just coming off the Farm Bill and working so closely with the members of Congress on it, one of the ways we were able to have some successful messaging was really to make it about food. Because really that is the wonderful product that a lot of times is what the end product is. And the urban legislators, the urban people in cities get that. And then I found that they want to support extension because it's like, this makes sense. So I think that was a great point, and it is how to message it.
It doesn't change the balancing act, Richard. There's no question about that, which we have every day. But there are some things that may be helpful in embracing that.
And new champions.
Yes.
The only thing we discussed last year, which it creates a challenge, having come from Florida, we got a conflict with the urban.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Master Garter is going out saying, the farmer's fault. Oh, wait a minute. Are we friends or enemies?
And you've got situations where really extension's real role, where they really need to be, is in the middle of some of those conflicts between urban and rural, and we should be there.
Yeah.
Where science and research help us answer those questions. Not a real comfortable place to be, but it's really where we should be, and we are. And I spent 12 years in Florida, and I got involved with those actually. So speak to them.
Well, my observation would be there is, if you're trusted by both sides, you can play that role, and there aren't many in this world that are trusted.
And if you can use the research base as a component of what you do. Okay, we're going to finally go to slide 4, because this really begins to address the technology issue, and this one is one that Tim and I are really going to do as a tag team here. But we've known for some time the need for technology in our work. And we started out with a program to do that called e-extension, which gets at some of those things like the 24/7, 365, providing information, staying on top of extension technology changes, and it's happening so quickly. And we've put up there a shark fin approach to the way technology is being adopted today. And what we're trying to do with the extension is to respond to that need, and that changes with the level of education of the user and what we think the customer of the next generation is going to be. So we've been really hard at work kind of reinventing the extension, and we've got some things that we're doing now to really make it more technology oriented. We think that there's still a need for both high tech and high touch, but this lets us have the technology that we can use to interface with probably a new set of customers and an increasingly tech savvy customer. And we've as a group of directors and administrators, changed the model in terms of funding, and had pretty good success with making the switch to that. We're kind of reorganizing it as we speak.
You know, I guess to me what this change reflects is we started out thinking e-extension would be a thing, and the thing it would be was the best of the best website with all the possible information that it could host. And what we've realized is that's really not possible, for one. And secondly, what we need to do is embed technology into everything we do. It's not, you know, a separate piece of what we are. It is what we are. So we're very creative in our new naming here by calling it the new e-extension instead of e-extension. But I think it really is going to be a different approach, and it involves looking at real specific technologies and how we equip those local folks to be able to respond to really in-depth questions and have the technology or convey the technology to our end users. So if Richard wants to know how he can make some use of UAV data, that we would hope down the road we've got folks that are familiar with that can address that can answer that and help producers on the ground adopt that technology.
We've had several groups that started out as we were developing this into what we called earlier communities of practice that I think we believe now are going to be called learning networks, where those groups have really embraced the technology, really used it with their customers, really gotten beyond the traditional extension audience to use those in these learning networks, which I think we believe then will be really good test beds for the next generation of technology. So that what we're really doing with this that we haven't done in the past is used it to know on the front end where the technology is going, and then to make sure that we're doing the professional development for our people so they can use it the best way right away. And that's one of the big shifts. And we've gone from an assessment model to a membership model, and Jane's been keeping track of that, I know, and it seems like we've had very good response from the directors across the nation so far.
I have a question, a clarification on that. The learning network, are you saying that you're making sort of the leading edge producers, for example, that may already be trying UAV, as educators by networking, sort of an extension model where it's producer talking to producer as well as educating the extension officials?
Yes, exactly. And the one that I know about probably the most is a lot of stuff in cultural waste management learning network, where they really have gone out and had a lot of interaction with producers, producers with producers, producers with industry, using that kind of a format. And it's been very successful. So I think we'd like to see more of those, more use of those at least in those areas to really test the technology.
Well, that's leveraging limited resources in a very good way, and the peer-to-peer communication where there is good trust. I basically applaud that just looking at it as an observer.
Thank you.
As a farmer, that's what I find to be very helpful is when we have our county master farmer sessions that our extension service tries to conduct every year. And it's the way of producers sharing the on-farm research that they're doing with one another.
Yeah, it's classic engagement, really, where the teacher becomes the student and the student becomes. That's a powerful teaching.
How widely adopted is that, or are you on the early curve in that process?
I think you probably could find examples all across the country like that. But the use of it and the the development of it in E-Extension is where we really want to head in that program. So more of that.
Right, and you're promoting it, making more people aware of it through various means?
That's correct. And today, this is being webcast to our E-Extension network nationwide. We've got folks connected either by audio, video, or by phone as a result of some of E-Extension's work. So I think a good example of trying to engage widely and not just talking to one another or not just talking to the folks we've always talked with. Good. Let's move on, Darren. I'm rolling my mouse and not getting the slide. There we go.
We're on slide 5 now.
So slide 5, real quickly, just to make a point, we're going to talk here momentarily about 4 particular or specific program areas, and we'll discuss a few of the programs being done and then what we see as some of the impacts from those programs. And we're going to try to do that representing the national system, but clearly Michael and I don't see what happens nationally every day. However, we've got a system that we drew the information from that you can access as well, and it's called the Land Grant Impact Database. And it's at a website with the URL landgrantimpacts.org, and this includes the results of research and extension work entered by the various land grant universities, and currently has over 900 impact statements. It's searchable by keyword. It's also searchable by state. So if you want to know what's happening in Florida, Andy, you can jump in there and check on them and see what good work is being done down there. Or if you're interested in profitability in agriculture, you can search on those keywords. And what we're going to do is utilize the impact statements that are in here very briefly and in a very aggregated sort of way, talk about programs and impacts in 4 particular program areas. Those program areas are topics being food, natural resources, profitability in agriculture, and energy. So we'll spend just a little time on each of those.
And I just real quickly mentioned to you that one of the ones that I've been on a regular basis sharing with Sonny Ramaswamy, the director of NIFA at USDA, a land grant impact a month. One that I'm sharing this week with them is one that we did about beef 4-H systems that Rob Kalmbach has been working on. And Rob is on your list for the Lunch and Learn from our group coming up, working on winter feeding options for cow-calf operations and really having a significant impact on reducing winter feed costs by doing it right with management. So he'll be talking about that particular project with you all later in the Lunch and Learn.
I know we're at the scheduled end. Do you want to continue, Tom? Or?
Let's go till 10:45.
Okay, another few minutes. Good. So we'll move quickly here. So slide 6. So let's start talking about again what Mary Pat mentioned, and that is food, because that is something we can all relate to at least 3 times a day, or we try to relate to it 3 times a day, right? So let me start by describing again in a very general sort of way some of the programs Extension is delivering in more than one state, and in most cases in every state, related to food. And one area is good ag practices. We're doing workshops at the farm level with regard to good ag practices, often related to pre-harvest and post-harvest food safety. We're also continuing to do a lot of on-farm variety trials and demonstrations. Anyone that's been tracking introductions of new varieties knows how quickly that's happening, how the various technology packages are changing. We continue to look at those across the country. Pesticide safety, very important, both for our workers and for our food safety. So we continue to do that work. And herd health training is again, a critical need, particularly in our livestock herds, to make sure we're following good practices there. And finally, I'll mention, related to food, there's a real resurgence in food preservation. And while that deviates just a little maybe from our ag focus here today, it's where the products we're producing are going and where our stakeholders really have a lot of interest, real resurgence there.
And what we tried to do is line up on that impact side for you what we would believe to be some really important impacts, and you can all see them there. I think probably each one of them, if you just move across the slide, you can see what we think are some things that we've, in our educational programs, have been able to do. And I think maybe the best thing would be to just roll on here if that's okay. Unless there's a question.
Well, let's open it up real quick and say, okay, those of you that think about food, what's missing from this list, or what programs should we be thinking about that, we haven't talked about all of them, but what do you think is a gap, or what do you think some needs are in terms of results or impacts that isn't reflected here?
I've been struck lately on the waste side, food waste side, and it seems like with your reach, and it touches so many things, maybe it's an impact that you might want to call out.
Okay.
Food waste. That's a good one.
There's infield,
Yep.
preservation, all
Right.
this ugly fruit.
Working
all
with
this
groups
stuff.
that have gleaners, I
Yeah,
think is pretty
yeah.
common.
It feels like you guys are in a great position to help create more awareness, solutions, and it does bring urban and rural together.
Yep, it's a farmer's market interface there or something like that. Yeah.
This is Kimberly Reed from International Food Information Council Foundation. So something that may be already a part of all this, but community, those stakeholders of yours feel to communicate about what they're doing, especially such an activist-oriented environment on the local level.
Yep. So communications about agricultural practices, about food safety, about the methods being used. That's very good.
Online comment that fertilizer education is a need.
Okay.
Yep.
Managing nutrients properly, and actually I think that may be on the next slide, but so many of these relate to more than one program.
A lot of overlap there, but certainly we're going to talk about that a little bit next.
More before we move on.
Okay. All right.
Good. So moving to slide 7. Let's see.
Yep. So this is the one that really we're looking at with regard to the natural resource and environment areas. Programs like watershed demonstration programs, watershed management in a number of different ways there. Stormwater management, again, there's a huge rural-urban connection there. And master logger certification for those that have a timber industry. That has certainly been a very important one in terms of doing it right with regard to harvest and with regard to replanting and taking care of the soil in the process. And wildlife management education, taking a look at those things in a number of ways, one of which is to use wildlife as a good signal for how you're doing in regard to environmental education and the environmental impact.
So just quickly, I think we all recognize that a strong agricultural economy depends on a healthy environment. So I think that's the purpose and the reason for many of these. I think the impacts there are pretty straightforward. The only thing I noticed as I was reading this was perhaps some of our wildlife management education needs to lead to decreased population in some particular species, because sometimes it's not about increasing, sometimes it's about managing overpopulation.
What about the carbon footprint, climate issues?
Yeah, those are important. They're important here, and are also really important in the energy side. And you're going to talk a bit about energy as well. But certainly that's a.
I know again it's more of this communication with consumers and this perception that agriculture has this negative impact, and in a lot of cases it can have positive.
Absolutely.
And the stormwater area that's on there is one good example of that. If you're living in a rural area but adjacent to an urban area, you're probably experiencing some things related to stormwater. It may be a proposed tax that you begin to pay, and yet a lot of the stormwater may well be diverted to your property. So we're part of the solution, and yet we're taxed as a part of the cost. So climate, so there's a lot of mitigation and adaptation work needed.
How about other comments or questions about this, either in terms of the programs that we're listing up or impacts that we may be missing?
When you look at this, Michael, one of the issues that I see, or that it's been a challenge, I think, for a lot of states, looking at the South, and you look at Florida, you've got the same timber industry, which is a man-made border that's put in there. Do you have the master loggers at Georgia and the master loggers at Florida? Have they come to say, okay, we'll only have one in this area because we don't need that duplication anymore? How do we look at, and that's just an example of stormwater the same, wildlife management the same. How are we looking at the duplication that could be out there, or used to be?
Yep. So really, that I can't speak exactly to the master logger program, but I think the question is, can we afford to live within our state boundaries and work within our state boundaries and ignore everything outside of those? And the answer is clearly no. We're doing a lot more multi-state work, I think, and need to continue to do that. And I think that's true for ag research as well. You know, we don't typically find the solution or find the perfect program within any one state. So I think we certainly need to do that. There are several programs that I'm aware of that do utilize that. Master Logger programs oftentimes, though, have to abide by state regulations, and so, you know, clearly there's a need to differentiate those as well, depending on particular forestry regulations. But I think it's an excellent point that we can't recreate the wheel 50 different times in 50 different states.
Well, I think there's a way, if you're talking to industry leaders, explaining the degree program. I know that I think Purdue and Illinois and Iowa are doing for corn and soybean fixing agents.
We're involved in that too along the Mississippi River.
Exactly.
Does the southern region still have the southern forestry specialist? They do. There is a southern region forestry specialist at Georgia that's doing some of that very thing across state lines. So that's a long-term multi-state program. Southern region. It's been very helpful.
Good.
Online question about invasive pest disease programs.
Invasives, certainly a need there, and boy, it seems every week or every month we learn of or begin to be concerned about a new invasive, so clearly a need.
And in a number of program areas.
Okay, good. We'll move on to profitability on slide 8. And, you know, I think we take for granted that we're going to have food producers, agricultural producers, but without profitability, it's going to be very challenging. So as an economist, I tend to dwell on this maybe more than I should. But I hope we're doing as much as we possibly can with regard to profitability. And that includes, obviously, things related to our management practices, whether it be irrigation, high tunnels for specialized production, intensive beef programs, estate planning, so that we've got long-term ability to move our farms from one generation to the next, as well as diversification into new enterprises. And I've listed agritourism here, but there are many new farm direct marketing opportunities and enterprises out there that agricultural producers are considering today. So I think those areas are certainly helpful in terms of ensuring profitability.
And you know, most of those impacts are reducing costs or increasing production, with the one exception there, thinking about farm succession. Next generation of farmers is going to be a huge issue in my state, and I suspect most places. Where this land is going to go, who's going to farm it, how we get young people involved, interested in farming, and that's going to be a major increase of a need for us, I think. How about responses to this, either in terms of where we're headed or impact?
There's no responses because there's so much profit out there.
So this one is the last of these 4 areas that we're going to share with you, and it has to do with energy and things that we've been doing in terms of energy assessment in operations, and that goes from production to processing, special production and processing, on into the rest of the food system. Things that we've been doing in ventilation management training is an example in livestock, confinement livestock operations is one that we've been heavily involved in. That has had an effect on reducing, not only reducing energy consumption, but improving production while we're doing it, and improving air quality as a result. So lots of things going on there, and lots of work looking at the next generation of crops and the impact that the existing crops have on energy.
And this one's probably a great illustration of our really close ties with the experiment station and research being conducted, and then partnering to help demonstrate what works and sometimes what doesn't work. You know, we're in a new era, and not everything that's been described or discussed is a 100% success. I think that's important for us to discover, so that rather than see wide-scale adoption of something that isn't, we discover those that are effective, and we determine which ones won't work and share that information as well. So energy in particular seems to be a place where that's important.
And that's worked, I think, well with the experiment station. It's also worked very well with some on-farm cooperatives, looking at some of these kinds of things and trying to work with producers to find out some things. Sometimes, as Tim mentioned, sometimes they're good, sometimes sometimes we find out that they're maybe not so good, but the best way to find them is early on in the technology. How about areas here, Tom?
Well, just some feedback as I look at it, going at the limited resources issue, looking at who else is providing the information and where the extension system's role is essential, and that may vary geographically too. But I would assume that there's a biofeedback mechanism where you're looking at, well, we want to do A or not at all, A grade, and drop some things off and focus on doing what you do as well as you can. So you can't be everything to everybody.
Yeah. Focus would be, that's right. Focus would be the word there, probably.
Good. Other thoughts or comments related to energy? $2 gas, we don't have to worry about energy, right? But I don't believe we'll have $2 forever.
Anything else on this one?
Anything online, Darren?
Okay.
Good. So we're going to move along. Again, we could spend a whole lot more time and go into greater depth, but we thought we'd sort of wrap up with some comments about some of the things that I believe we're looking at from more of a national effort that will eventually work down towards state and county or regional programs. And they're in these 4 areas. We're looking a lot at water, and it doesn't matter if you're in a dry state or a state with an abundance of water. There seem to be a lot of concerns about water. Will it always be there? Is it of the best quality? Are we doing our job to protect it and so forth? So, and again, thinking about messaging, that's very important for us in the future as well. Pest management is an area we've been working to in terms of some national initiatives. And a new one that's really starting to gain some effort and attention right now, again, goes back to the connection between food and people and making sure we've got healthy food options and leading towards healthy people. So that's an effort that's really just starting to get fleshed out right now, again, largely between experimentation and extension participants, but with other stakeholders involved too. And finally, what was mentioned earlier, climate and climate change. Are we doing what's needed? Are we serving the people to respond to and adapt to changes in climate? You know, I think we're shying away from causes and rather focusing on what to do as a result of what we're observing and what we're experiencing.
And whether that's a long-term issue or a short-term issue. I think we have to look at it probably in both cases. How about reaction response here?
Well, I'll throw one out. That I look at this as a business. You all are in the business, and you provide a service, and you find out from the marketplace whether that service provides enough value for people to pay for, maybe not directly, but by advocating for federal and state and local funding. And I assume you pick those issues in part because that's where the action is, much like anyone else would as a business. And one of the challenges is translating that into a constituency that says, we want that paid for so that we can have it. And if you don't connect those dots, then you aren't sustainable, just like any other business.
Absolutely.
And I think, I think we look at that in terms of being able to get the support from an appropriated dollar point of view, but we also, I think, see that there's some very mission-aligned software out there. So I think that's one of the reasons why we see it as an opportunity. And in some cases, it is from a business point of view, but I think it's also because we believe what we know, at least today, that our stakeholders are interested in that, at least in the questions surrounding those.
Yeah, that peer-to-peer process that you identified to me fits in any of these issue areas, and capturing that because advocates and proponents of the system's neutral arbiter science-based, to me that's one of the key tools you have moving forward to develop a sustainable system that provides the value that it can provide.
Good. So move on to the last slide, and we'll wrap up this part.
Just an online comment pointing out that all these issues are interrelated. That climate change affects water.
They are.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
They are. Good point.
Yeah. Excellent. So what do we do, with this sort of feedback? What do we do looking towards the future?
Right. We got some good, Jane's got some good notes, I know.
My laptop is my hand's about to
But we do have,
I didn't know about this.
We do have. Any final thoughts?
No.
you, and then we'll go back.
So one of the things, the Bethany Johns, the Broadway Crops and Soils, the people on the phone, one of the things that the research community, I heard the word science and research come up a lot. We are those people. One of the things that we're majorly concerned about, of course, is the funding for research. And we're trying to work together with all stakeholders to increase that funding. And one way to do that is to come together on a set of research priorities. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on creating a set of research priorities? How do you see Extension maybe trying to fit into that list? Comment on that.
Well, I think a couple of things. One is sort of a detail, but that is that we are engaged right now, Experiment Station and Extension working together to come up with, we call it a roadmap, Mike. I'm forgetting the terminology, but developing a joint roadmap that would identify those priorities. Because if it's a research priority, very quickly it's an extension priority. Doing the research and not disseminating or sharing the results doesn't really provide the value that we need to be providing. So I think working together to identify those, and that should include obviously input and dialogue with the researchers, but also with our community stakeholders too. You know, the whole spectrum.
And especially with you, I think you realize that we haven't been having a conversation like this. We're trying to fix that. So we're committed to do that.
Maybe not my place to speak to this, but the experiment stations 2 years ago and actually published the Science Roadmap for Agriculture, a second edition of that. There's 7 major challenges there, and I'll share cards with you, and we will exchange information to get that to you.
And going back to the land grant impacts database, the areas that are identified there were agreed upon jointly and determined jointly with the experiment station folks as well. So again, it's research and extension working together. Can't do one without the other. Great point, Bethany and Mary.
You know, and I also think the healthy food, healthy people one, it's been my experience that it actually bridges a lot within a land grant. So it brings it in the public health, it brings in the medical school, it brings in all the other parts of the university that had no idea what the experiment station was doing. So I think that's a great new initiative because it kind of adds more support when you go to a state legislature, or when you go to Congress, or any kind of new funding. We're all in it together.
And it's a systems approach, a whole food system, a whole health system. That's the nature of the problems. They're pretty complicated.
Well, I know we got to move on. Do you want to wrap up, Tom, or
We'll give it till 10 till.
okay?
Okay.
I'm not sure I would refer to it as a whole food system, but
The entire.
one of the things that we've seen, especially as you all know, since the 2000s when we hit the economy and everything, and state budgets dramatically collapsed and it had such a severe impact on land grant system, is a lot of what I would say new efforts to collaborative research, you know, public-private, all of that. How does that come into extension as farmers look to subscribe to specific data that they may be getting through the internet? And how does extension look at going out to the private side that is now looking to provide similar or the same information in an aggregate? Is that competition, or is there a way to figure, you know, collaboration for public-private?
I think our role still remains in that neutral, unbiased assessment, first and foremost. And again, we don't do that independently. We work with Ag Research to do that. But when it comes to information delivery, if the delivery is provided by the private sector, it's awful hard for us to justify delivering the same information. I think the trick is, can we provide value by assessing, evaluating, and determining the results of such packages, whether they be technology or whether they be marketing services or whatever. So I think our role is still in that assessment, evaluation, on-farm adoption, not so much in building the same provision of services that are provided by the private sector.
And the other thing that I'd add is I know that that's a huge discussion right now. of conduct, what's public, what's private, who owns what, so forth. But I still think our role is to see how when the data that we could have can be useful in research and extension. How those data can be used to help us with our education programs, that's the data we need. As long as there's an opportunity for that to become public in a way that we can use it for educational programs, I think we're okay. We are involved in some of those discussions. Lots of organizations and businesses are involved in those discussions, understandably. Some of that will have to be, I suspect, worked out on the private side, but we'll be able to use big data, if you want to use that term, in ways that we can in research. I suspect, Mike, as well as extension. I know I had a conversation with my dean, my experimentation director, the day before yesterday, and we were talking about that, how we might work together, and how because extension will have a role in that.
Kimberly Reed again. I don't know if something called Expo Milano is on your radar. Do you even know what this is? Okay.
No.
So we're excited at the Sixth Foundation about the World's Fair that's going to happen next year. The World's Fair happens every 5 years, and it's been rebranded Expo. The last one was in Shanghai. The next one's next year. It's in Milan, and it's going to be a themed World's Fair. And the theme is Feeding the Planet. It's going to be the world's largest, most historical gathering on food, with 20 to 30 million people going through 144 country pavilions and learning about our story of food, and our State Department is helping spearhead that effort of building that pavilion. But 1 billion people are probably going to be engaged online in some way, including, I think, your stakeholders. And so happy to talk with you more about that, but I think not only do we need to know in the U.S. what your extension program is doing, but sharing that concept, as you mentioned, international with other countries.
Yeah,
so,
great.
When is that? It's from May through October of next year.
Okay, Bill Hoffman's got final word here.
I didn't want to jump in when we were talking about invasive species and your pest management priority, but it made me think of probably one of the greatest triumphs of the extension system that I can think of, in my opinion, of the last 10 years, and that's when soybean rust hit the United States. And the extension system collaborated with the soybean disease multi-state project and went out and put sentinel plots out in the countryside to determine where that disease was and the progress of that disease. It was all about, does that soybean farmer need to spray or not? Right. And and really the success of that whole system, the aggregation of that data, the putting it up of a map, that was big data before big data was cool. Yeah. And the real key to that whole system was the fact that everybody participated, and the state south of you was participating, and you were getting information from the state south. And that all ended in Florida, which doesn't have a lot of soybeans, but Florida was a very good citizen, and they had probably one of the best plant pathologists in the state out stomping around kudzu patches instead of being in the citrus grove. And so, and the system, the cooperation has only strengthened since then. And so it's the viability of each state system really weaves into a tapestry that can make an important national impacts in a multi-state context.
And one of the big things, though, in terms of that, not only is the state specialists, but the folks in the county that were heavily involved in that monitoring.
The sentinel plots were on farms.
Right, and that's a real strong piece of the system.
And at the same time, the nutrition folks were out there saying to urban audiences, hey, this is not going to affect you. Don't quit using products with soybean oil in, because that's something that this is something that just affects the plant. It's not going to affect the final product. Not savings by farmers that they save in products, not sprays.
So I know we've more than used our time. We want to thank this group again and thank our online participants and appreciate Appreciate all
Thank
the
you all
comments.
very much.
Yeah, Michael, we appreciate it very much.
Okay, and this is Tom. What we are this is used further by getting it online, including the questions that you posted during the presentation, and finding some way to provide continuing feedback so that it's not. All right, we're going to take a break and then reconvene at 11 o'clock for the National CFAR board meeting program. Be back.
Yeah.
Thank you, buddy. Bailing me out.
They're right on the back.
No, very,
I got a little confused. I was on budget calls all morning. I didn't realize we were starting at 5 in the morning.
how are you, Bruce?
I know.
Yeah, that's because when you do party Friday night.
There you go.
I'll get to it.
So thank you. I'll be on there for a while when you get there.
Don't give up on. I like what you said on collaboration.